We did them whenever.
I'll
So
say,
you guys
man.
didn't send everybody an iWatch?
I'll say that's your league, big dog.
All right, guys, we are live now.
That's the same thing as the Big East. The Big East wouldn't let us do anything. And then, to my knowledge, the only coaches that got furloughed was Marquette. Marquette, it's just
Hey guys,
all got furloughed.
we're live now, so just want to give you a heads up before we divulge any secret information. All right, so we're just going to wait for a couple more minutes, and then everything is live on YouTube as well. So
Ramsey, you look like you're about to hit the Xbox right after this, man.
no shame in that. All right.
Ramsey, you're on mute right now. There we go.
I'm sitting here in the garage because I got people upstairs sleeping. So I'm like, my girl's sleeping. She'll kill me and wake her up to do a talk strength and conditioning.
My wife just took the kids and the dog out for a walk around the neighborhood, and then they're about to go for a ride for a little bit because they get after it when they're in the house, man.
All right. I think we're going to start now. So just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank all of our speakers as well as all of our donors. You can see here on the screen, these are the companies that are taking part in this. It's been a really, really good turnout. We're trying to get that fundraiser up as much as we can throughout today. So if you have a chance, if you have a couple bucks, everything helps. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat so that you can just click on that and make a quick donation. We'd really appreciate it. And now I'm going to hand it off to Eric McMahon from the NSCA. He's going to say a couple words, and yeah, we're going to kick things off.
Hey everybody, from the NSCA, I just want to say I'm proud to be associated with this event for this cause. As a field, we are being tested right now, and the coaching community has really stepped up. And it's so impressive what we've done just from all these virtual events and webinars. And, this is something that I really hope we can continue as a field. After COVID-19, this is our way of fighting COVID-19, and I'm just really proud to be a part of this event. The fundraising efforts, the sponsors, it's a testament to everybody, the organizers, everyone here, just following along and learning. But just want to say thank you from the NSCA, and hope everyone enjoys the content today.
Thanks, Eric. So Fletcher, you gonna tee it up?
Yep, we're all good here. I just wanted to go ahead and give thanks again to the NSCA. Obviously, what you guys have done has really beefed this platform up, and honestly has probably ran up our viewers. Just the opportunity to get those CEUs, that's big time. It's unbelievable. And we thank you guys again for that. Hawk and Dynamics, obviously Ben and Drake, providing this platform. I don't know if that gets enough credit. What you guys have done is special. Giving us this platform and putting this group together is awesome. Sornex, just want to give them a shout out. The off the grid rack, what they've done is big time. You give your 100% of profits to every single one of those racks that's sold is going right to this cause. Really good work there. Teamworks, they've opened up their, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Teamworks, but they've opened up their entire software to anyone for free. It's unbelievable platform for communication. If you haven't tried it, give it a look. It's free right now. Encourage you guys to take a look at that. One of our own in this group here, Coach Sanderson. He's you go to his website, campsanderson.com, and take a look at his book. He's put it on. Profits all go towards this for today and tomorrow. Above the Rim. give that book a look. It's a way to learn, but it's also a way to give back to this great cause. I think continue to think about the cause as you're watching this. If anything strikes you, that you get just a little bit of information, you feel like donating, please continue to donate to the cause. And I want to take, again, the opportunity to thank the hosts. These guys have done an unbelievable job putting this thing together. I don't know if I've heard all of their names mentioned at one time, but Ben, obviously with Hawk, and Matt Gildersley with University of Buffalo, Lauren Green, UC San Diego, and Drake. What those guys have done to build this thing and get the team together has been special. Obviously, an unprecedented group of speakers that's free, and you don't get that very often, if ever. I think this is probably the first time. So appreciation to those guys for making that happen. Quick introduction of our speakers today. 10 unbelievable coaches, and it's of the 10, 4 of them have accounted for 6 Final Fours. When you think about that, it's a special group. Multiple conference championships. These coaches account for 5 National Player of the Year in college basketball. It's a special group, and the confidence in who they are as coaches is what leads to the success of their programs. I think you'll get a glimpse today. It's 10 coaches, and they're all completely different, and that's special. It's gonna lead to great conversation. They all have an unbelievable network within this community, but I think also probably more importantly in the college basketball world. If there's a job that opens up, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these guys isn't involved in who's getting that thing and the communications going through these guys. So it's just a special group, their network. We'll talk about that a little bit today. And honestly, it's just exciting to be able to kind of lead this roundtable today. It's thankful for the opportunity. These guys are awesome for coming on. Again, they're doing it for free. It's their time. We got guys out on the West Coast waking up at 6 this morning. It's special, and we thank you guys for that. So, Drake, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, I just wanted to say thanks again to Sorenex. That first day they did have $25,000 in the pot. That was within 24 hours. So I don't have a new number to release yet, but they did mention yesterday that it was a lot of money. So that's pretty cool on their part.
Yeah. Again, great group. So without anything else, guys, I think it's going to be exciting. We're going to kick this thing off. I'll go ahead and start off with the first question, and this is directed towards John. I think one of the things that you've done there at Michigan, John, is really individualized in your assessment process and the way that you've worked with one or multiple of athletes. I think if you think about who you've worked for and what they've recruited and what you guys have been able to do in your development process and get guys to the NBA, it's special, but it's not just one type of athlete that you've done it with. It's multiple. And, if you could touch on a little bit, how you assess, how you evaluate to create that training prescription that you come up with, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Fletch, thank you so much. Thank you for all the sponsors. What an incredible weekend for us as coaches to give back and serve. Easter weekend, I mean, this is incredible. So I'm honored to be part of this. And my hope is that we can, make a difference for all those families that are suffering and all the frontline workers and all the servicemen and women. So thank you, Fletch, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. So Ben, it's saying I can't share my screen. So how do I? There we go. Get back and serve. Yep, I got it. Incredible. So okay. So my question is about how we assess and evaluate our athletes. So I'm going to kind of go through our process. It all starts with, I want to see how guys move. That's our first thing. And I know that there's a lot of cliche movement screenings, out there. Over the years, I've gone through all the different testing and all the education. My wife is a physical therapist. So this has been, frankly, my favorite part of the job is how do guys move? implementing our performance testing, NBA combine testing, using technology. I truly believe that we can't train these guys alike, but we have to have some type of culture where we don't have 15 guys being personally trained at the same time. So I'm going to start with movement screening and kind of our process. The ankle, the hip, and the thoracic spine have always been the three big areas where tightness, lack of mobility can creep in. The anterior shoulder, I always throw that in. That's not a traditional thought, but the more I do this, especially your athletes that are tight through that bench press a lot in high school and just are bigger coming in as freshmen, their anterior shoulders, their lats are always something we want to look at. A posture analysis. So basically, does this athlete show any type of anterior pelvic tilt positioning that can lead to poor glute function, low back dysfunction, and just, frankly, poor movement patterns. We look at loading and landing. This can be done, formally through some landing type of drills that we can evaluate. We do a lot of slow motion video, or just by watching them play. So that's kind of the beginning, and then overall movement quality. I'm amazed at how many we've had our share of. We've had some 5-star guys. We've had a ton of 4-star guys over the years, and I've always been amazed that you bring in a top 50 player and he's a movement mess. Like, he just doesn't move well. And our point guard, Xavier Simpson, who started the last 3 years, his first day on the campus, I'm watching him run and watching him play open gym, and he's waddling. He's literally up and down, back and forth, because his hips were so tight he couldn't stride. So that's kind of my first step. I like images and graphics. That's why I put the slide up. The first one, ankle dorsiflexion test. This is what we do. With the heel down, 3 inches from the wall, can the athlete touch his knee to the wall? The second picture, Mo Wagner. This is a 6'11.5" center who plays for the Wizards currently. You get a 6'11.5" kid that can sit down and do overhead squat that deep. That's pretty good movement. And then the next picture is that anterior pelvic tilt that we always look for. Bottom middle is the Thomas test. That's been a staple of what we do for years. And again, tied into that anterior pelvic tilt. And then I'll sum it up. The movement portion of how we assess and evaluate our athletes is we'll create a mobility map. And all of our guys will have a map that everything that's red is indicative of tight or restricted areas. And then with that map, some guys will have 1 or 2 things that are lit up in red. Others, like this athlete, had a lot of movement dysfunction and tightness. So whatever's tight, whatever's red will be tied into mobility prescriptions, extra soft tissue work. These are the type of guys that are really lit up in red that, on the road, at the hotel, I'm doing extra mobility stretching before, after games, practice, you name it. They're on the table, they're getting extra work in with me and my staff. The next kind of bucket, this is my 19th year as a coach. I've been doing the NBA combine testing protocol since the beginning. So lane agility, vertical jump testing, no step in a max vertical jump with a 15-foot approach, 3/4 course sprint, bench press 185, and then all the measurables, measurements, wingspan, standard reach, things of those nature. Then we get down into weight room testing, and this is where, as a former player, in the Big Ten, there was great value, and I remember getting strong meant a lot. And in our league and other leagues around the country, we all know how physical it is. So I've never been shy to load our athletes. Now it's got to be done, in a proper way. Guys got to, pass and graduate a certain level before they move up. But we've had a lot of guys that squat over 400 pounds in our program. We've had a bunch of guys that power clean really well. Now, not everyone, that's not always a good movement for everyone. our current roster, not everyone's doing the Olympic lifts. We individualize all those things. We'll test chin-ups, obviously the bench press, I already mentioned that. And so that kind of rounds out our weight room testing. And then the last kind of bucket is using technology. And this is, it's fascinating how there's been an explosion of new technologies out there, especially the last 5 or 6 years, my goodness. But force plate technology is just another way for us to check every box, and I just like, does a guy have poor eccentric, rate of force, or does he not have that concentric burst? Does he not utilize range of motion? So those are all things we look at. We have a NORD board, so we'll look at eccentric, hamstring strength. We have the force frame that also is kind of your hip abduction, adduction. So those are the areas. And then to sum everything up, what we're going to do is, again, I mentioned at the beginning, I don't want to write 15 programs for 15 guys and have everyone running around doing their own thing. We got to have a culture where we're training together, and we could have team training, we could have small groups, but I write a base template, and I'm big on whatever cycle we're in, and we can talk about periodization and one of the further questions down the road, but I'll write whatever phase we're in. I'll write my base template for the guys that are kind of in the middle. They don't have any huge needs. And then I go through it, and guys that need extra mobility, they're going to get an extra dose at the beginning in the warm up, maybe at the end. Stability, all your guys that move well but don't brace well. There's all kinds of, I like doing a lot of standing toughness type of things where they're competing for bracing, holding ground, and then we always deal with guys that need to gain weight. So extra volume for your gun show, your extra shoulder work, your extra lunge circuits. Back to the force plates, guys that have poor eccentric outputs, we get them on the K box, and maybe it's 1 day a week they get an extra 3 or 4 sets of 8 reps, 10 reps, extra conditioning, things of that nature. So that's kind of the summary of how we go about our process. So hopefully that sparks some discussion. And if anyone has any questions further, I'd be happy to answer them. So, but I love it. This is, again, this is for me, my favorite part of what we do, and we figure it out, we get a great plan, and we get tremendous buy-in because the guys, they believe like, man, this is going to work and it's for me, and they're still working together. So that is how we assess and evaluate our athletes to create our training prescription.
Yeah, off of that, guys, and one of the things John talked about was mobility and stability. I think all of us battle that with the type of athletes that we train, right? It's long, lanky guys that are just, that their levers are really long, and it puts them at disadvantages at time. Does anyone have anything that they add into that kind of I'll call it the marriage of mobility versus stability, and how you guys kind of look at that? Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I think one thing, and I've heard John speak, and I've spoken to him numerous times, so I love what he does. I think he's very pragmatic in his approach. So John, credit to you on what you do, man. I think one thing that once we've done the analysis, once we've put them through the barrage of testing that we find important, a lot of it just comes down to teaching. And so the first time they've ever been introduced to one of these drills, they have no idea what it is. Their brain doesn't know how to communicate the mobility and stability to the body on how to actually make it through the motor pattern. And so anybody who's seen my guys train, I really, really emphasize tempos in training. But I think emphasizing tempos in warm-ups and giving the brain the ability to communicate to the body and feel it and not turn on these inhibitory mechanisms to shut down movement patterns. I think it's underutilized because of some old cliches of, train slow, play slow, XYZ, but we're teaching motor skills. And so that's one of the biggest things for us that we'll do when we get our guys in, whether that be in the summer, spring, whatever it is. We slow it down significantly to train movement patterns and let their brains communicate to their bodies how it should be done efficiently, how it should be done effectively, because they've just never been asked to demonstrate it before. So just a thought there.
That's good. That's good. Go ahead, Ramsey.
Yeah, and first, I second what Alan said. John, I think you give a incredible pragmatic approach to, trying to dial in programming, but also do it in a team environment to create culture. So kudos to you for that. But if I was to add on to what Alan just said, I think so often we think of stability as like this, I don't know, these ideas of like Bosu ball training and balance stuff comes to mind, but stability is an active process for the tissues. And so when I think of how you train that, and then we combine that with the idea that movement is skill, since we're all basketball, that becomes relevant. If you want to teach somebody how to, shoot a elbow jumper, you're probably going to start with spot shots or something, right? You're not going to go into the James Harden step backs first. And so, that analogy for me in the weight room is the same. If you're going to teach a skill, which is movement, things like tempos, like Alan's talking about, become, very helpful and relevant, because we're just trying to slow down what, the end goal, and then bridge the gap between what we want to see and what we currently see. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but I think appreciating that it's an active process that involves active muscles and tissues, and it's a movement. So it's got to be skill-based. Those things just come to mind.
Any other technologies that guys are using for the assessment? Anything specifically that you found, hey, this is, this really hammers this home, or we get a deeper dive into this because we know that if we use this piece, we can actually figure out up or down the chain where the issue is. Is there anything that you guys are using technology-wise? Go ahead, Mike.
There are a series of things that you can use. One of the things we used at my last job was the Canavio system. I think that's the name of it. I have it right, but it's kind of, it looks like your Xbox. It can really evaluate angles and where they are and make sure things are in a proper alignment. And that really falls into place when you talk about mobility and movement and assessing, because a lot of times this trouble comes in with how you transform from one position to the next position. So making sure you can get in that position properly and maintain mobility to get to the next position is really, really, really important. And it's been a really, really good tool to give you kind of a metric that you can actually see and measure over time.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, we use a similar process. It's called Kineticence. It uses an Xbox camera. It's a 3D, just a functional movement screen, and it just gets all your numbers set up so you can record it and see it over time. So you're not just looking at it off of a sheet or an Excel sheet.
Is that recorded over time? How does that capture? Or is that something that you guys can constantly pull back or draw from?
Yeah, we can. It's just, we got a dedicated computer and a hard drive to it. And so it's just hooked up to a video screen, and you can do basically whatever movement you want, whether it's a step up, overhead squat, whatever. And it's just going to catch every angle from what you're doing. And so you capture it, keep it, log it onto the player, and then you can show them over time how they've changed.
Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, John, question for you. How often are you kind of reassessing that test process? And, I've found, because I do a lot of those similar tests, and I imagine a lot of guys here do as well. I found after a while, you kind of, that pattern is that pattern for that athlete. So what do you find is useful to reassessing?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So, I mean, at the minimum, as soon as they get on campus, we want to spend that first week evaluating. And then to answer your question, it's kind of at like, if they're getting on campus at the end of June, we'll reevaluate kind of in the early fall. I mean, the thing about the way you move, I mean, it depends. Like the performance testing, obviously that can be done, more frequently. But mobility is not something that's ever going to change. You're not going to all right, let's do some mobility. And then like 10 days later, it's like, oh man, it's way better. You know, it's a process. And I agree with you. You know, if you get an athlete on a scale of 1 to 10 and they're a 3 in terms of anterior hip mobility in their quads, right? Hip flexors, quads. You know, the goal is not to get them at a 9 or a 10. Can we get them to 5? You know, and so the athletes that are valgus and their knees are collapsing, you're always seeing that stuff. My wife, I remember she taught me this years ago. You're not gonna alter that athlete and all of a sudden they're going to be perfect. But can we teach that valgus knee to be more functional, to decelerate better, and can we take 10 degrees out of that valgus knee? So, you know, to answer your question, it depends on what we're doing, but you know, throughout the year, I mean, I would say the mobility at least 2 or 3 times we're checking up. But we all know this. There's a daily check-in that's not formal. It's called training. Like we see how they move every day.
Right.
And whether we're squatting or whatever we're doing, we're gonna see and we're gonna make adjustments to what we do. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
You know, I'm going to go and kind of touch on what other people are talking about from a technology standpoint, because the last 3 schools I was at was Utah State, University of Texas, Arlington, and Southern Utah. So you talk about, you know, low funds, low budgets. And I have a background in Olympic weightlifting where I trained under a, you know, very, very good Olympic weightlifting coach. And one thing that we do in our program, got the camera. And it's funny because when you actually have your players and all you do is you stand at the angle, not right to the front, not to the side, just hit them on that 45-degree angle. And when their set is done, hey, come here, big dog, check this out. See how your positioning is good. See how this, see how that. And it works really, really well in the weight room. And it's no different for these guys than it is when you're taking a picture with your friend. I mean, they want to see what they look like. They want to look good. So if you're actually showing them how they are performing on a camera, and there's a time and a place for it. I mean, if you're in a team setting, you've got 15 guys, you got 20 minutes, that's probably not the time and place. But if you've got guys hooked up to chains and you're doing chain sprints, you got guys working on Olympic movements, you got guys, you know, going through deep knee bending, being able to have an instant feedback that you're pointing, you're talking, and you're going through the whole pattern with them. I mean, man, we started doing that at Utah State, and it was just an immediate jump up where we had never done that anywhere else I'd been. You know, and guys just start moving better. There's an immediate feedback. They can take it from set to set. I mean, they can even take it rep to rep if you're doing something like clusters. So I don't think you got to have $100,000 budget. You just got to have one of these in your pocket. You can go ahead and get some really, really good feedback and good work done from a technology standpoint.
I'm going to grab one question here that someone's typed in because we both kind of touched on the Olympic lifts. The criteria is to decide whether or not they should be, should athletes should take part in the Olympic lifts. And then if they don't, what are some of the substitutes that you use? And then once we answer this one, we'll move on to our next question. John, do you have?
Yeah, I can take it. So, you know, the first thing I look at is, does this athlete have any type of training history? Did they use the Olympic lifts? I mean, in our population basketball, very rare, you know, but you'll get some guys that have a little bit of a background. And you know, I rely on our force plate data. Like, does this guy have an incredible concentric burst already? Does this guy, like, you know, we've all had freaks, you know, that, you know, they're 6 foot, they can windmill, like whatever, you know. How bad does this guy need to be more explosive, you know, or is this guy so tight and restrictive and could just, based on our force plate data, need to get stronger, you know? And so I look at all those things. I've kind of, again, you know, 19 years doing this. I was probably a lot like Alan. Like, we all did it. My Marshall days, Clemson days, Fletch and I worked together in Michigan for 2 years. We all power cleaned and we snatched. And as I've evolved as a coach, you know, I basically have made decisions case by case and based on buy-in and how, you know, all these factors. And these 5 or 6 guys, this is a great movement. these other 5, 6, 7 dudes, maybe we're going to do something else instead. So that's kind of been my process. And again, that process creates a lot of buy-in. Nothing worse than making a dude power clean and they can windmill at 5'11". Like, why? So
yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. We're gonna go move on to the next question here. It's kind of directed towards Casey. Obviously, unbelievable season, man. It's one of those unfortunate situations where it got cut short. You guys were on a roll. You've done a great job with Obi and National Player of the Year, and obviously you guys are running a special program there. But I think the question that all of us are going to kind of kick back and forth here, and I'm excited to hear some of the answers, is what do you plan on doing when your athletes return to campus, right? We all know that we're limited with what we can do now. We all also know that everyone's going to want to be back to March shape on the first day that they're back. That's what we battle all the time anyways. So Casey, really interested in what your thoughts are, and then obviously we'll kick that around.
Yeah, thanks, Fletch. Yeah, so I think there's so many unknowns to this. Been talking with sports medicine and admin at our university, and kind of just trying to think of, what are the practical things we need in place to get to train again, whether that's from, social distancing or CDC guidelines, or, really what are the new industry standards following this from, maintaining and training in a weight room. But let's just assume for argument's sake that, that's already worked out. And let's assume for argument's sake, we get the guys back at some point here in the summer. I think what we've talked about at Dayton between myself, between Coach Grant, Mike Mulcahy, our athletic trainer, what we're looking at doing is kind of, once guys get back, kind of take them through a whole battery of tests, very similar to, some of the stuff that John had, as well as, repeating EKGs, all that stuff, just to kind of see where they're at. And then from there, what we've talked about is a two-week kind of period where we're not going to touch a basketball. Or what we do is going to be very, very limited. When by that, I mean kind of strictly limiting it to voluntary. And that's kind of per Coach Grant. So really, really fortunate that I have a coach that, sits there and says, hey, we don't have to get there and do 2-a-days right away. But I think that is still kind of a working thing. But what our plan is during those 2 weeks, you're going to start to see, issues pop up that are kind of from the reintroduction to training and reintroduction to stress in their bodies. So, you can take them through those tests, but in 2 weeks, you're going to see really what kind of training state they're in. And then from there, what we've talked about is kind of treating it almost on a case-by-case basis, where it's like a return to play protocol from injury. So, certain guys might come back and be in good shape. Certain guys, might not have been doing what we've asked them to do. And even if they are, what they can and capable of doing right now isn't really enough to prepare them, I would say, for jumping back into traditional training. So from there, slowly start to implement the basketball from non-contact skill work into, some live play over the course of the summer. But from a training standpoint, I really think, and maybe you guys feel differently, but it's really going to change, at least for the short term, how we load and how we stress the body. I don't think you can go right back to, doing a lot of the fundamental barbell lifts in a heavy loaded fashion. I think mobility and circuits are really going to be kind of what we have to do in the short term to get them to a point where they can train again. So you're kind of almost looking at, kind of an extended GPP phase. And a lot of that, depending on when we get them back, if that's July, okay, you still have a period of time where you can load at some point. But if we're saying it's later than that, I mean, that's kind of all we can do at this point is just get them ready. But I'm really interested to see what your guys' thoughts are and what you guys are thinking about for your teams.
Go ahead, Dave. Hey, Dave, you're muted still. You just look in your box and that those 3 blue dots, click that and you'll be able to unmute yourself.
All right, how's that? Is it good?
Yep.
So Casey, that's exactly what I was thinking too, going back. I know as we get back on campus, our coaches are going to take as much time as they can take. So I think our negotiating process with our basketball staff is going to have to start before these guys even get back to campus. We're going to have to start negotiating for time to prepare those guys, because the basketball coaches are going to want to get right back. A lot of them will, some of them won't, but get right back to where they were. And I think it's going to be a problem if we don't ease in the way that we're supposed to do to it. So, you know, one of the things I was going to do is go back to that GP elongated phase, basically train everybody like they've done nothing for the last 2 months. So I know I'm going to have some conversations with the coaching staff about what their portion of their hours is going to look like as well.
Scott, go ahead.
Question to you guys is this a good thing or a bad thing for college basketball? My opinion, I think we come out on a good note. I mean, these guys have not had time off since what, they were 10 years old? Question.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Brady.
Yeah. Well, just from my own experience working with a lot of the guys, I mean, I've had so many kids just come in with stress fractures. The amount of kids I've just inherited having stress fractures, and all of that's just from AAU and kind of what Scott's saying is just playing from 10 years old. So I think part of that reconditioning process, it's going to be good. It's the first time they've actually been able to heal and maybe even gain some benefits from the training we've actually done with them the last, X amount of time that we've had them. So I think that this could be the best thing for them, to be honest. And I think that, what Coach Anderson or what Coach was saying up earlier is just that, when these guys come back, we got to negotiate with the coaches, because they're going to want, them to come back as good a shape as possible. They're going to want them to be in that March fashion, what Fletch is saying. So we got to talk about elongating a little bit more time in the weight room and a little bit less time and easing them back in. Who knows when that's going to be? Might be August, might be September. We're talking about football right now. I think most athletic departments are. So basketball's kind of on the back burner. But
Coach Hill.
Oh,
No, yeah, I agree with Scott. I agree with everybody that it's sad that it took a global pandemic for everybody to get a true off season and a true time off to kind of degress and build up all of the necessary recovery time that they need. But I agree 100%. I think it's actually, we're going to come out of this a good thing.
John, go ahead.
So completely agree. I mean, Mike, Scott, you hit the nail on the head, man. So I have 2 boys, 12-year-old boy and 9-year-old boy. So my wife coaches my oldest son's AAU team, and I help out. And I am amazed. So I'm seeing the AAU circuit at the 10, 11, 12-year-old level, right? And I'm on the bench helping out. And my oldest son has teammates that don't play any other sports and have been doing this circuit of playing basketball year round, some of them since they were like 7 and 8 years old. And so they get to the level Ramsey was at the NBA level and certainly our level, and they're a mess. So, I agree with Casey, like we're going to have a very slow progression back. But this, to me, all those guys, all the tendonitis that we deal with, all the wear and tear stuff, like, my goodness, thank goodness for a little bit of a break on our joints and like kind of a reboot. So agreement with everybody. So.
Is there anybody have, there's a good question here about, obviously we talked about the assessment process that we normally go through. What about an assessment process, and would that look different at this point now versus what it normally looks like? Because we're used to them being at a certain point of conditioning, for example. Is there going to be a different assessment process for, let's say, conditioning before you get them into, court activity, or are we going to approach conditioning differently? I think when I think about myself personally, like in the last 5 years, we don't really do a whole lot of conditioning, right? And maybe you guys look at that differently than I do, but we don't have to condition because we never stop playing basketball. And normally it's a case by case situation for conditioning. This may be something where we're looking at that differently because everyone's coming back, maybe untrained. So is there an evaluation process that people plan on using for that? Are you going back to a traditional conditioning test? Are you not going to do that? What's the build-up process to get back to that point? Casey, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. You know, this is really going to change how we condition or really implement that. I think you got to think some of these guys' capacities to be able to just go through multiple workouts in a day are going to be shot, whether that's weight room, basketball, whatever. One of the things that I've looked at from my time when I interned at the NSCA was the 30-15 IFT by Martin Boucher. So just an intermittent fitness test, because I think right away, you know, you can't really go into kind of our high intensity. Maybe if you're doing your 17s, your 10s, whatever your normal basketball conditioning was, I think it's got to be kind of intermittent interval training. It's kind of on a lower intensity. And I think the nice thing with that is, if you're not familiar with that test, is you can then have prescription-based running from that, but also you can see guys start to progress from that. At a certain point, they'll plateau, but I think that's a nice way of saying, hey, these coaches are going to want to see some data showing, hey, are we improving in our conditioning? And that's something that you could say, hey, after a certain period of a couple of weeks of doing this, the numbers will go up. They're not going to go up exponentially, but you know, I think that'd be something beneficial to start with.
Yeah, just to touch on that, the 30-15 IFT, I was I was fortunate to run that with Martin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he actually put me through it in Australia whenever I was over there, and I remember giving a presentation on it with John back in 2011. So it's a great test. It's a really good one to put guys through, and certainly it'd probably be something really good at this time to have a baseline and then have your individualized prescription based off of what those guys are getting on that test.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Fletch, I got one more thing.
Go ahead, John.
I think this is important to add. From the player perspective, I mean, we're all talking from the coaches and from our perspective. What do you think the first thing they're going to want to do when they get back? As soon as they get on campus, they don't care about going to class as much. They want to hoop. Yes, Dave and Casey, they're going to hoop. That's what they love. That's their passion. So I'm not worried about what we do in the weight room. I know we're going to have a progression. We're going to get it right. You know, I'm not worried about our coaches, to be honest with you, because I think we have a nice system with our sports med. We got our athlete trainers, incredible, Alex Wong. You know, we have a nice infrastructure to work as a team with our dietitian, everybody. But to me, you know, I'm concerned, and I want to put some, you know, regulations on them playing. And I know that they're going to want to sneak in at midnight and play if we tell them they can't. But to me, I think they need to go through a minimum of a week or two process where we don't let them free play, and we got to go through some skill work. We got to graduate with some shooting and just reintroduce movement and cutting to this population before we let them free play, because that's the biggest risk right now. It's not what our coaches do, frankly, I think. Well, it's not, I don't think it's going to be our workouts. So just another food for thought, but we plan on implementing some type of policy, something to prevent them from playing for X amount of time until we feel good about it, you know?
Yeah, same.
Interesting question here from one of our the guys that have been leading these comments. Jay DeMeo, he wants to shout out Casey, A10 guys. He says stand out, but he what are we doing, I guess, right now to kind of prepare these guys for the break? You know, like they've never done this before. What is there anyone doing anything, ease in guys' minds maybe that, hey, this is this is okay, or easing the coaches' minds a little bit? Is there anything, we talk about being proactive, getting to them, Dave, I know you mentioned that. Is there anything going on there? I know that's obviously a really tough conversation. I can't see Coach Greenwald going in and telling Coach Martin that it's okay. I know how I'd feel if I was doing that with Coach Underwood, but everyone's situation is different. Is there anything we're doing right now to kind of ease those guys? Go ahead, Al.
I think it's important that we remember you can't bullshit a bullshitter, right? And we know what our guys are really good at. They're good at basketball, and they're good at getting out of things, and they're good at telling a story, right? I mean, that's just student athletes in general. So here's my thing on this. Every conversation I've had with every single one of my players has started with, you know, how you doing? How's your family doing? Just making sure that they know we care about them. But two, it's reinforcing that, yes, we are going to be behind where we would normally want to be, but that's okay because so is everybody else. And that's where our culture is going to take over. Okay. Let them know that we're going to be smart and intelligent. But I think you got to put into their brain a little bit that, hey, right now, the number one focus is academics. We've switched everybody over to online classes. We're doing satellite support through our academic services. And I think they need to continually be aware that priority one, you can only have one priority. It's called a priority for a reason. And priority one is academics. And again, you just got to reinforce to them that, hey, we're giving you some things to do. We're checking in. We're making sure everything's staying good on the home front. But we're going to be behind. That's okay. We're going to get it back. Just don't lose your mind about it because everybody else is going to be behind too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so we have pod meetings with our staff, for everybody that touches basketball, from mental health to their assistant coaches, athletic trainers. So we have a Zoom meeting set up the other day talking about our team. And I started hearing about everybody that was calling the players. They could be getting up to 4 or 5 calls a day from our staff. And you know, I started thinking, you know, I wouldn't be picking my phone up either. And at some point, you know, we had to just make available to them, hey, look, our mental health people are still there for you. You have their contact information, you know, but getting our hands on them, trying to every day, you know, the head coach is getting them, the academic guys on them probably every day to turn in stuff. If they had injuries, athletic trainers and the strength coaches are after them every day. All of a sudden, these guys are getting bombarded every day with calls. And so, like, I really had to think about that. And it's like Alan said, I tried to call them twice a week. My first conversation with them was all about, you know, how are you doing? And then the rest of it was about training. You know, what can we do to help you wherever you're at with what you have. So just wanted everybody to think about that too for a minute, as many people that has their hands on these guys, how much they're getting blasted.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know. Go ahead, Ramsey. Go ahead and follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think Dave just hits on a very prominent point of how much, you know, they take the tournament from us, and all of a sudden we think like these guys aren't doing nothing, and so everyone wants to call them and all that. So that's something I've even tried to be very conscious about. But the other thing that comes to mind with all of this is the reality for everybody is we all had aspirations to play through the first week of April anyways. So what I've been pushing is, yo, if we would have achieved the goals that we wanted, we would all be sitting at home relaxing anyways right now. So, you know, let's take it a little bit slower, because April would have been the downtime anyways, where we weren't worried about training too much. At least for me, you know, I don't know how everyone else does it, and so now they take the tournament and we end up in April, and now it's like, let's train, let's find ways to train. But the timeline doesn't change. Like, the goal is still now next March. And so we still have a lot of time to get to the next goal, but because they took the tournament, it's like, oh, how, you know, what do we need to do right now? And for me, I'm like, we don't need to do anything right now. Sit at home and relax right now. It's our off season. Like, let's take this first month to get off the joints like we should.
That's, yeah, awesome point. And unfortunately, we're gonna have to move on to the next one just to keep this thing rolling. But I think to kind of fill that in. Obviously, Dave, unbelievable point there. It's just, it's so true. You know, everyone wants to have hands on and make sure everything's going okay. And there's times where that can be too much, and probably is too much. And then obviously Ramsey, yeah, this is the off season, you know, and managing that and making sure that everyone is okay with that. I think communicating that with your coaches, whether you're a basketball strength coach or whatever strength coach you are, trying to get that point across to the coaches right now is that it's what Alan said. We're all here in the same spot, and understanding that, and it's okay, and putting those coaches at ease to make sure that we can kind of get through that mental, I guess, block there of we got to get back there right now. So move on to the next question here, and I'm going to tee this one up for Coach Chapman. And I think we're all going to have a lot to talk about here, but what does culture mean to you? How do you instill your culture? And especially when you first start working with a new program. I'm looking at 3 coaches here that are all or 4 coaches that are all in their first year of implementing a culture. So really be curious to hear what you guys have to say on that. And then there's guys that have been with their teams for 10, 11, 12 years. And it may at times take that for granted that the culture just runs itself. But what you've done to get it to this point is special, and how have you maintained it is even more special. So if I can get Mike's thoughts, and we'll just tee that around.
Yeah, so for me, culture is what happens in your team when they're not being supervised. So what's really going on there? And you think about it from this angle where, you know, habits are learned. When you look at your team, you should see the lessons. Habits are taught. So if you look at your team, you see the lessons that they've learned. And I think that's really important, you know, when you're talking about the day-to-day with your guys and, you know, creating that culture. But for me, it's real simple. It's real, recognize it's real. I'm about as real with them as I possibly can be. Obviously, when I first get there, I meet with them individually, let them get to know me, I get to know them, and open up that line of communication. And then from that point, what I'm doing is I'm setting a new norm. So what I'm letting them do is I'm saying, hey, this is how we're going to do things. This is why I want to do it that way. And let them know that, hey, once these standards that I'm setting, like, we're not going to deviate from them at any point in time ever. All right. So usually right after that, I run something called a culture workshop, and I'll go, who are we? What do we want to be, and how do we get there? And that's their ability to have some buy into the culture, some empowerment to them, so they can create some buy-in. And then the values that they give me on top of the things that I have, so I'm going to hold them to. Once those standards are set, we're not going to budge on those ever. And, you know, I don't really do that because I really need their help, but I do want to empower them and give them the ability to have some ownership in that process, because that usually makes things really go well. On top of that, I think it's really important that once we have those values set, I relay those values to life. So it's not just be on time for the weight room. It's be on time for the weight room because when you leave here and you're a man and the ball stops bouncing, you have to be on time for your job. And if you don't, you jeopardize feeding your family. And so it's all about relating everything back to life for me, so that I'm helping develop men, you know, and that's really, really important, because when they see that you care about them as a man, they're more likely to listen to you as a player. So for my whole process of developing culture, I invest in the man first, and then bring the player along as I go there. Also, it's really important for them to understand cause and effect. Everything you do affects something else later down the road. So yeah, it was just this one thing that you thought you weren't doing, but it's going to affect the group. So if you can't do a set of 5, you're probably not going to be in the right spot on the plane. It's going to affect us there too. Everything affects everything, and it's the ability to hold each other accountable. And I think that's crazy important, and I think it's kind of overlooked, to be honest. And then we come to our actual training environment. When we get in there, I kind of have an approach of where early on I control everything, just because I want it done certain ways. So whether it's how we load the bar, how we move around the room, what our intent is with it. And as they start to really get an understanding of what we're doing and why we do it, and it becomes a habit for them, I slowly start to fade to the back, because when they're out there playing and they're out there doing other stuff, we're not in front of them yelling and screaming and jumping and doing it. They have to be able intrinsically motivated to get it done. Now, when they step off the path, I'll pop their hand and put them back on the right path. But I think it's very important that, you know, you fade to the back and you let them learn how to lead, and you teach them how to lead, and you pick those times to develop them. And that's kind of how I've done things. And as far as when it comes to training and touching the barbell, That first 2 weeks, when I talk about training intent and creating a good environment, I will stay on a set of something until they give me what I want from it. So I understand that maximum effort and intent is what we're looking for, what we're trying to get. And intentional, and also, there's really no intensity without intent when you touch the barbell. And so they have to know what we're trying to get to and where we're going. And that's kind of how I go about it, with having been a very, very real person, being very authentic, very genuine. And probably the key to it all is being consistent. You can come into a situation and be like this raging bull and firing guys up. I'm probably like a nice strong river. I'm eroding away. I'm every single day, hit the same thing every single day, every single day, every single day, every single rep. And over time, that consistency breeds consistency from them. And over time, what you see is they start to buy into it as they get results, right? And we getting the results is what really gets them to believe in what you're doing, because they have to believe that buy into you early on before they buy into the system because of the timeline. So it's all about just creating that buy-in and really getting them, teaching them how to work and letting them see benefits from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't let this one pass without talking to Coach Knight at Gonzaga. We were on a phone call a week ago and we ended up talking for 2 hours. I said we should turn this into the podcast, but I know their way. It's unique. It's special. The culture there is good. Mike touched on it, the intrinsic piece. Trav, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and kind of what some of the stuff that you guys do.
Sure. Well, loved everything that Coach Chapman had to say. And I think with the group of guys he's probably got down there, they're very probably wanting to be challenged at a high level, a lot like our guys, in that there's an academic component there that probably ties into expectation, and all of a sudden you have these all these areas where you've got to excel. It's not just in one area. And so for us, I think the idea of intrinsic, for me, going back over almost 10 years, in our program, I saw us shift to a place of really being externally providing all the motivation, management, micromanaging to a certain degree, which was kind of getting away from who we were. And what I saw as a byproduct of that, I didn't like. I felt like we as coaches were expending tons of energy. We were all exhausted. Players were exhausted. And we weren't getting the kind of outcomes in terms of their performance or just their level of engagement. And so for us, I think the culture piece has a lot to do with providing space for them to fail in small ways that helps them see the trajectory of where they're going if they choose to let us do all the driving. That ultimately, wherever they want to go with their career, they're going to be the ones who are responsible for it. So I think that's where we try to create a conversation using questions more than driving with statements. Instead of having them just memorize and repeat what we have to say, it's really about getting at what do they really see? What do they really think? What are they developing mentally, physically, spiritually, the way we want to see? And if not, then, how do we step in? And that's a uniquely individual situation. And I think it's really difficult to be able to connect to the deepest levels unless they're personally giving you themselves. If they're trying to be somebody that they're not, if they're trying to match the model you've thrown out for them, that's always going to fall short. But if they're being who they are and they're doing what matters the most to them, it's going to have a different perspective. So that's where every Monday, I meet with our team for 15 minutes. We watch a video clip of something, or we have a conversation where hopefully I do 20% of the talking or less, and they do 80% of the talking with no coaches present. And the energy that is created through that process, I think, carries a long way through the season without getting too, caught up in just the monotony of the rhythm of the grind or whatever you want to say. So I think culture is really, really impactful. But I think it's interesting when they develop it from the bottom up intrinsically versus we just deliver from the top down. I think it's got to come from both, where this is very clear. This is our standard. This is our culture. But then it's cultivated from the bottom up where this feels like me. This feels like what I want. This feels like us. And this is who we are. So.
That's awesome. That's I think trying to create that balance is extremely challenging at times. But obviously what you guys have done there is special. I think those Monday meetings that you've talked about, we could probably go for an hour on that alone, but it's special. If you guys get the opportunity to try to look at some of the stuff Coach Knight's done there, make sure you guys check some of that stuff out. I want to take this question and kind of go a little bit of a different direction with it, because when I'm looking around, it's one thing to have the culture, and we talk about culture, and Mike did a great job of touching on it in the weight room. I think the other piece of culture is getting our staffs and our coaches to believe in what we're doing, right? I think a lot of times people fail in this position because maybe a coach doesn't necessarily believe in that culture that they've instilled in the weight room. How do you bridge that gap? How do you communicate with your coaches? What does that look like? I think I want to go to Brady with this one, but how do you get them to buy into what you're doing? Is it something that they see within the players? Is it something that you're communicating with the staff? Is it just consistency? What creates that success of the culture bridge from the strength coach to the basketball coach?
Yeah, I think, well, first, Coach Chapman touched on a lot of great things, and congratulations on the new position, and same to Coach Ramsey. I think if you look at guys like Fletch, who's made it through coaching changes, I mean, that's a testament to, the culture that you've created at the University of Illinois, and how those staffs believe in you all the way up to administration. And I think whenever you take a position, I think it's almost got to be a partnership with that head coach. You got to believe in each other. What is your head coach about? My boss is Aaron McKee, and he's a reputable man. He is who he is. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and we have 4 pillars of what our culture means as Temple University. It's hard work, it's toughness, it's commitment, and it's consistency. And I think that if we try to develop our own culture where, maybe a head coach doesn't necessarily believe in something, I think that's where a lot of people have issues, is they're constantly trying to prove themselves, and they're not necessarily partnering with what the program actually wants. Whenever Coach McKee hired me, the reason why I took this position, other than the fact of being a great position, was the fact that I believed in Coach McKee, and I believed in who he was. And I think that starts the same thing. It's just building relationships with people. It's genuine, prosperful relationships that people believe in each other. And I believe in him and who he is as a man, a husband, a father, as well as a mentor, a professional athlete. And then I think he believes in me as a professional as well, as just a person who just cares for other people. I think if you can just portray to your kids that you truly care and you just stay true to yourself, I think that half the time people are just trying to be, who they're expected to be, whether it's a coach wants you to be a cheerleader, a coach wants you to be a sports scientist, a coach wants you to be this. The best person you can be, and I'll touch on this a little bit with my question, is the best person you can be is you. And how can you aid your coach and be an extension of that coaching staff to be able to help build that culture, from the ground up. We talk about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. If you got a bunch of kids where you're constantly having to negotiate with them every day to work hard, it's going to be really hard to be successful. So you're trying to build that culture from the ground up, and you're trying to get these kids to start believing in themselves and start believing in you. So you're not having to jumpstart them every day. You're hoping that they walk in the weight room and they believe in what they're doing, and they care about what they're doing on the court, and they don't want to fail you because they actually build that relationship with you where, like it is with my father and other mentors in my life that stepped in. And even, Coach Fletcher gave me my first job. I never want to disappoint Coach Fletch. And I think that if you can develop that relationship with your people, and you can have that where you just don't want to let each other down, that's how you really build your culture, because you truly believe in each other.
That's awesome, man. Really good stuff. I want to go to Scott here. If you think about a culture of toughness, if any of you have had the opportunity to play South Carolina at some point, I think you probably have an idea of what that may look like. I know we went down there and scrimmaged them last season. I walked out on the court and I was like, oh boy, you're just looking at monsters, and the way that they carry themselves. And I've got a friend on staff there, and Coach Shingler and Scott does an unbelievable job with carrying that into the weight room and just what you guys have built. I mean, I don't know, I can't speak to it. I haven't been in it, but I know from the outside looking in, when you think of South Carolina, you think of toughness. And how have you been a part of that marriage with Coach Martin and your success with him and the amount of time that you've spent with him? What, just if you could touch on a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everybody about culture, how culture is such a key component to me to being successful. I've been very fortunate to be around, Coach Martin for a very long time. Before that, it was Coach Huggins. And they, let's be honest, culture starts with them, right? Head coach. I mean, that's just where it starts. So, you got to kind of feed off of them, what they want to see. Let's be honest, every college basketball coach out there is a crazy bastard, right? In some capacity. I'm going to flip this on you, Fletch, because here's the question I have to you guys, is that you guys have a culture, but you survived and you bring in a new coach. How does you change does your culture change from the, you know what I'm saying? Like as to the players, when Coach Underwood came in, obviously it was a different culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you, I guess, adapt to that culture?
Yeah, it's Scott flipped this on me. I'm the one that's supposed to be asking questions, but I guess now I'm going to be the guy responding. Well, number one, I called you because I know that you had worked with Brad in the past, and I'm like, man, I got to start trying to figure out what this is going to look like. But I think that from the time that Brady was with me, obviously Drake's on this call too. I think if you would have looked at what I've done at Illinois, necessarily, I don't think there's been a whole lot that's changed in terms of what we do in the weight room. And it's because of what some of the things that Travis spoke about. It's the relationship with the players that has allowed us to get the results. Culture goes on philosophy, and I think we could all talk about what we do in the weight room, and all of us are different. Some guys do this, some guys use this, but what I can see is within our teams, everyone gets great results. So really it's the relationship with the players. As for the communication with the coach, it's understanding, again, what did he want? What does that look like? What does that need to look like? And then whenever he sees us, he sees that that's being instilled. Coach Gross was one way. I was fortunate to work for Pat Scarry, who is pretty similar to Coach Underwood in their approach. So I had seen a little bit of what I thought maybe that was supposed to look like, and that helped. But it's really just the experience, and then the amount of time. I think it's the one thing that maybe we haven't touched on, but it's the amount of time that you have to spend with your staff, with your players, that they understand that you're there at all times. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've got to be there 24 hours, but your presence has to be felt 24 hours. And they need to know that whenever it's getting done in the weight room, it's getting done in the weight room. And whenever it's at nutrition, the guys feel your presence. They're making the right decision because they know that you've got their back. The coaches understand that when they're on the court, they've seen the work that's been put in with conditioning, that there's no doubt that our guys aren't in good shape. Those are the things I think that help kind of bridge that gap between the players and the coaches, and ultimately get the respect from both ends. So where there's never a question, hey, what's going on in the weight room? Is it good enough? I want to go to John because
I was going to talk anyway.
Fletch, hold on.
You're not off the hook yet, Fletch.
I like it.
I will say this, what I really enjoy about, once you have your culture set, and it's a daily, it's never, ever perfect, and we work at it each and every day. Everybody's culture is set differently, but once you have it set, what to me is what's enjoyable the most is when your players, your older players, hold everybody else accountable.
Yes.
Whether they're coaching in the weight room, whether they're making sure guys go to class, where you can actually step back from it and let your players run it. That's what satisfies me. That's relieving to me. And I'm sure you guys are probably the same. And I understand when we got the job here 8 years ago in South Carolina, it took us probably 2 or 3 years to even get remotely close to where we wanted it. Are we still working at it each and every day? Absolutely. But I like to step back and let our players, and I enjoy watching them coach each other in the weight room, coach each other on the court, making sure guys go to breakfast, where we don't have to monitor them every single minute of the day.
Yeah, that's the highest level. I think we can all agree on that. Whenever you get it to that point, it's our jobs all become a lot easier. That's for sure. John.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that. I mean, Scott, some great counterpoints and questions, but I agree as well. I mean, but none of that happens unless you have a great culture coming down from your head coach. None of that happens if you don't have great relationships with your coaching staff and your players to get to that point. Like, there's so much education and building up that it takes to get guys. Not everyone is just naturally like a leader like that. We've had a few. Yeah, I think we've all would agree. There's a few out there, but the majority are not built to just take it over and lead and hold guys accountable. We've had a tremendous culture for my 12 years at Michigan, and our best teams, like our point guards, would like grab a dude, like if they're messing around, like they hold them accountable to that point. So some really good thoughts. Back to that first question Scott had, like when, you talked about with the new coaching staff, we just went through that. Coach Beeline moved on to the NBA, and then Coach Juwan Howard came in last spring. My first thing was, like, what are your values? Like, what's important to you? What do you want this team to look like? This is your team, not mine. My job is to provide a service to help you and your coaching staff win ball games and for our student athletes. So, our first, few weeks was about building that relationship, spending time. Coach Howard would come in and work out with me. He's still a pretty fit dude that wants to lift and get after it. So incredible. That first few weeks was great. But, what do you want? Like, how are you different? How do you want this to look? Because like Scott said, it's all about the head coach. It's about us providing a service for the head coach.
I'd like to hit that for a second too.
Okay, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
And Scott talked about it a little bit, but I was at the University of Miami back in the early 2000s. May have been the best culture I'd ever seen. When guys were late for stuff, strength coach didn't have to do a thing. It was taken care of by players. Sean Taylor and Jonathan Villman, those guys, they took care of it. They would hold their hand out to the strength coach, say, hey, I got this. And it wasn't over the top. It wasn't the kind of stuff that, like they punished him. But I mean, it was such a great culture. And that, and John's right too, it starts at the top. If you guys are familiar at all with Tim Kite, with Focus 3, he put out the thing that says, leaders create the culture. Culture drives behavior, and behavior produces results. So if you don't like your results, then it could be because of your behavior. And it could be your behavior isn't right because of your culture. And then it, ultimately it comes back to your leadership. And so, I grew up in the military culture. My dad's a retired colonel. So I've been in culture since day one. And so it's just really big for me, the culture piece. And I think that, talking about the military, their culture, they cost them lives, right? Our culture can cost us livelihood. And I think I've seen it happen. And it's something that, like Scott said, you have to work on every day. But I just wanted to hit that for a second, John.
I'm going to go ahead and take this one more direction because I think it's a unique situation. We've talked about You're at a place, the coach got let go, a new coach came in, you maintained your position. You're at a place, you had great success. That coach moved on to the NBA, you maintained your position. Let's go to one where you were in the NBA, okay? You go to a place that has had unbelievable success underneath a great strength and conditioning coach and Coach Hootie who moved on. How did you come in and change or make that become yours? I'm interested to hear that, just because it's the only other side of this deal that hasn't been touched on, and really curious what you did.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. I walked into a position that you know, the culture was kind of established, if you will, or at least the I don't know, the reputation of the culture, if you will. So, you know, I didn't come in and try to reinvent the wheel at all. I think the first thing I did was come in and acknowledge that this team has been really, really, really good without me. It's going to be really, really good with whoever takes this job. So I think it's just appreciating that, you know. And then I think, you know, everybody kind of touched on it. It comes from the head coach. I work with a Hall of Fame head coach. And so I think my first thing is get out of the way, right? Just let that start kind of establishing the early culture. Now, I came in September, so that's also an interesting timeline, right? Like, I don't have an off season to establish a culture or expectations, or literally my first day was like first day at boot camp. So I think earlier somebody had mentioned, like, you know, I think it might've been Coach Chapman. So one thing that I did when I came in is I kind of acted like I was a tough guy. And I did that on purpose, because you can always back off, I think. But if you come in kind of soft and let the players kind of think that they can run over you early, then I think you're in a bad position to start. So I came in the other way. I came in trying to pretend I was this hard ass coach, and I think they were a little afraid early. And then I backed off, and you fast forward a few weeks, and, you know, I'm cracking jokes with them and all that. But I think I started with just trying to set a foundation of expectations and rules, and doing that in September is pretty challenging. You know, you start doing it in June or July. I think you got some time. So that was the first one. But the other two things that really came to mind as everyone was talking was I treated everybody as the CEO. It's kind of a concept that I always run with in my own mind. Like, you're a CEO of your own body, your own business. And as an athlete, your body is your business. So, you know, if I'm going to treat you as a CEO, then the first thing I did was I sat down with everybody. I said, where do you want to be? Like, what are your goals? And if I have their goals in mind, then whenever I go to push them, it becomes very easy, because it's not my own goals. I didn't set those. You told me you want to go to the NBA. I didn't say that. So now when you're late, that's something that I can say, like, yo, you said you wanted to go to the NBA. So that was the first one. I think just figuring out what motivates them and then using that to help them get there. The other note I wrote was gas them up. And that's something I try to do a lot. You know, I think it's easy for us as strength and conditioning coaches to try to implement culture, especially of accountability. A guy's late and your first inclination is like jump his ass, because that's what we're supposed to do. And certainly we do those things, but I gas the guys up so much that when it's time to hold them accountable, they know that they owe me one, because the night before during the game, I'm telling you, you're the best big man in the country and yelling at you about that. So now when you come in late the next day, and that's not a real example, because my big man was never late, but you know, I think it just, that's one way I try to balance it, is I gas them up so much that when it's time to actually hold you accountable and I got to put the hammer down, nobody's offended, nobody holds it against me, because they know I'm there for them. So those are two things that come to mind. But I think the biggest one is, you know, I work with a head coach that runs his ship pretty tight. So, you know, it's my job just to sit down and enjoy the ride.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. I think the networking piece and then programming is on the way. I know we've kind of went a couple different ways here, but the networking piece is huge. And I think when I went to start trying to put this group together, everyone was one contact away. And I think respecting each other and understanding what each other does is really important. But then also the other side of it, which is, you know, who do you know, where you go, and how do you get into these positions? There was a question that came up on the question and answer board here, and it was trying to get a job and not being quote unquote a basketball guy or a basketball girl. And the question lines up great for Brady, because Brady played golf in college. So not necessarily a basketball guy, whatever that is, right? John and I played, I don't, we have football players. We have guys that didn't play a sport in college. That, I think your network and your relationships outweigh all of that. So understanding how to get to that point, and those tags or titles no longer matter. But Brady has done a great job of getting to that point where he's at, obviously, and how quickly he's done it is special. So Brady, if you could just talk a little bit about network and really what you've done to kind of move up in the industry.
Yeah. I think sometimes people view networking a lot differently than you should. I think the tag of being a basketball guy or whatever it is, I just don't know if that necessarily matters. I think that networking is really about, relationship building. How can you build relationships and how can you captivate people whenever you speak to them? Do they believe in what you're saying? Same thing I was talking about is culture. It's the exact same thing. It's building relationships with people. I think if you look around this room, obviously everybody has an unbelievable network to be able to get to the positions that they're in and even, be able to stay in those positions. And whenever you change coaches, and be able to stay in those positions at that time as well. So whenever I kind of got this question, and I appreciate it, I looked it up and actually got a definition of it. And what networking really is, it says to cultivate people who can be helpful in one professionally, especially in finding employment or moving in a higher position. So whenever you think about that, I think that's, kind of a wrong way to look at it. I think if you're going out and you're trying to develop relationships with people strictly because you can get something out of them or that you want to be, somewhere higher, I think that you're messing up right there. And I think that it starts with who you are as a person and you understanding who you are. And I think that your network ends up being a reputation or a gathering of that. With Fletch, it had nothing to do with strength and conditioning. It had nothing to do with basketball. And it took some time to be able to build that, and I think it takes time to be able to build relationships with people. So whenever you go out and network, just make sure that, that first instinct of, say you're at the NSCA and you're just walking around, you're shaking hands, how are you leaving an impression on that person? Is there a real reason why you're going up to shake their hand, or are you just shaking their hand so you can email them in 2 months and say, hey, I met you at this conference, let's jump on a phone call? What are you really getting out of that, or what are they getting out of that? And will they even remember you? Make sure you're specific. Make sure you're confident in the question that you're asking. And I think it takes a level of vulnerability too, and humility. And because we're in this field, we all started lifting weights for certain reasons. I know I started lifting weights because I was a fat kid and I wanted to look good. That's why I started lifting weights. So once you start lifting weights, you start seeing a little bicep, you feel a little bit better about yourself. You gain a little bit of an ego. So we're an ego-driven culture as a profession. So I think networking, a lot of times you're a little bit standoffish as a culture of who we are, and little less about, who we are as people. I think that if you really want to build your network, you have to believe in who you are and why you're asking the questions that you're asking. So, I talk about, myself. I was telling them that, just to be honest, all these bass on the wall and there's deer back here, that has nothing to do with me. That was all my father. But, I was proud of how I was raised. I'm from Southern Illinois. I got Southern Illinois roots, and I try to portray that every single time I talk to somebody, because that's genuine of me and that's authentic of me. That's who I am. And I hope that I ooze that whenever I talk to you. You feel my passion and you feel how I am and what I believe in and how important it is. I think that when you stay true to who you are, your circle ends up reflecting that. And, it's easy for me to say because now I'm in this network, but maybe it's somebody on the outside looking in. It's like, how do I become part of that? Or how do I get to where that person is? Or how did that person get there? It starts with going out of your way to talk to somebody. But again, it's not just going up and shaking somebody's hand. It's because you're identifying a need of yours. For me, let's say, selfishly, this is a networking event for me. I'm in this event where I can talk to all these people, great coaches who've had unbelievable success. And I can follow up with Coach Bishop. I see his posts and I see a lot of stuff he puts out. He understands periodization of every sort you could possibly think of, tempos, everything. I can follow up with a question with him and we can start to build a real relationship. I'm in the American Conference, and now I have I have that network of people I can talk to. I think that you just need to identify what issues that you need and go up and you actually have a specific question for somebody. Because the last thing you want is, for myself, and I've had so many people take the time to talk to me. But now that I'm in a position where people are asking me questions, I realize that whenever people are asking ingenuine questions and they're just trying to get a hold of me just because they want to be able to talk to me, it's a lot harder to respond sometimes, because it's like, okay, what are you getting at? What do you want? How can I actually help you? If you actually ask me a specific question, and I respond, maybe we jump on the phone, maybe we connect, if we connect and then we follow up. And then I think it's really important too, is the next step is you have that conversation with that person. They actually helped you. You follow up with them and you tell them, hey, I kind of implemented some of the stuff you were talking about, and this is how it helped me, and then you can kind of start building that relationship a little bit. And it's all about who you are. And I think that, one of the biggest things for me, and hopefully, Coach Fletch believes this in me, but I try to be as loyal as I possibly can. And loyalty is something big. And that's not anything you can prove on one conversation, 2 conversations, 3 conversations. I think it's something that's got to be built over a long lasting time. And that even starts with the coaching staff too. Your coaching staff is part of your network. When it comes to basketball, you guys talk about being basketball guys, and we do a really good job of helping each other. But half the times in these jobs, basketball coaches are the ones making the hire. They might not even ask you one question about strength conditioning. When I came on my interview with Coach McKee, I can't tell you one question he asked me about strength conditioning. He has no idea what I do, has no clue. I don't even know if he's seen me train the guys. So when it comes to networking, it's not about going in and proving like, hey, I know this, I know that, I know this, I know that. It has nothing to do with that. It's just building a relationship with somebody that lasts and being genuine and being authentic. And we're all different. We're all completely different, but we're all alike in some way because we have similar goals. Why did you get into this profession? And I have my own story. I'm young and I'm in a really good position, but I've went through my bumps in the road. Coach Fletch has been there for a lot of low times and a lot of high times. And everybody's got a story. Everybody's been rejected. Everybody's went on an interview and didn't get a job. Everybody's reached out to somebody and they didn't reply. And that's okay. You just keep doing it. And I think that kind of the point of my whole entire being, and I'm rambling a little bit because this is something I'm passionate about, is building meaningful relationships with people. This is why I do it. Is just be who you are. And I think your circle will end up reflecting that. And if you find yourself surrounded by people that are like you, just understand that that's what your reputation is, and really build out your reputation. And selfishly, hopefully this is a chance for you guys to all get to know me and reach out to me. And maybe there's something I said that maybe captivated you a little bit, and you can ask me a question and we can get on the phone and we can talk, and I can help you build your network and you can help me build mine. It's the same thing for everybody. And I'm sure everybody can speak to this.
Yeah.
And I'll stop talking now.
No, you're good. You're good. It's all good. Is there anyone else that wants to follow up on? Obviously, Brady did a good job. John, I want you to go ahead, man.
Brady, that was impressive, man. The piece about being genuine, the piece about your intentions, and I'm really big on being intentional and with what I want to do and doing it right. So networking and just building contacts and it has been a huge part of my career, and frankly the reason why I'm at Michigan. I've been here for a long time, but I want to say this. I think it's all started with a service mindset early in my career. High school coaches, small college coaches that didn't have resources would reach out to me and, hey, can you help me with the program? Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've had so many, today I call them friends now, but guys that I didn't know at all that reached out to me, and I took a minute, responded, wrote a program for them, for their high school or whatever with, obviously within the rules. And then just getting out there, I made a few notes myself on this one because Fletch knows this is what I do. And I've had a lot of guys work for me, a lot of interns. We have 3 to 5 interns every semester for our entire department. I usually get 1 or 2 of those guys that'll be over, or gals. So So I've had a lot of people that have worked under me, and I always think about how can I help them, and I've gone to the Final Four as an attendee, going to the Performance 4, or even before the Performance 4 clinic existed. I just went to meet coaches and get out there. And I always remind myself, there's been plenty of years where I'd rather just stay at home. And I reminded myself, like, I can help one of the guys that work for me. I can help somebody with this. And so that's been a big part of my career. And as you get older, some of us are younger in this profession. So some have been in it longer, but how can you help others? How can you serve the guys under you? And again, one of the first things I said was, this is Easter weekend. What an incredible time to serve. So I appreciate those comments, Brady. I think your heart's in the right place and spot on, man. But that's what it's about for me. And so you got to be intentional about getting on the road, visiting NBA programs. Ramsey would tell you, I visited him when he was with the Kings. What was that? 2014, 15, somewhere in there. So that's been important to me. So those are my thoughts, Fletch.
No, it's good. It's really good. Go ahead, Ramsey. I'll let you follow up, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, no, just briefly, John, you brought it up. You think we ran into each other in 2014 or 15. Nick Stauskas was with us. And I think just for the listeners, one thing, and I don't even think we've connected since, Coach, but one thing that stuck with me, I was, I'm still a young guy, but I was obviously 5 years younger then. And, Coach walks in and never felt like he was, looking me up and down. Sometimes you get that with strength coaches in our field, like, they're critical and want to judge you because of X, Y, and Z. But, when you start talking about genuine, authentic, and intentional, that was something that stuck with me, Coach. So I appreciate that. And I'm glad you shared that.
Awesome. Hey, this next one we're going to go down a rabbit hole. And I'm really excited to hear everyone's input here. And I'm going to start with Scott. A brief example of the year-round program. I know that's going to be tough and it can take time. But what does the off season, the preseason, the end season, the postseason, obviously this year is different, but let's talk about the normal year, because it feels like the season never ends. So what does that look like for you? Management, extras, whatever just go ahead and go with it. Just curious.
We could talk all day about that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll say this, what we do is very primitive. It is about as basic can get. And what I mean by that is we have a postseason. So right now we're in a postseason, and we generally give our guys a couple weeks off to do nothing, focus on academics. And then we get them back in the weight room, your typical 4 days a week. And we do an upper lower split with a Wednesday off. And we do that for about 3 or 4 weeks until we start implementing back into basketball. Like I said, I've been with Coach Martin for a long time, so I'm pretty fortunate for him to allow me to kind of design when we're back on the court and when we're not, and what we're doing on the court. And what I mean by that is by length of time. As we get out through April, our guys will go home in May, which we tell our guys, listen, it's time away, not really time off. So we try to keep them active in May, which gets us now back when they come back in June for summer school, which I think this is the 9th year. It used to be 9 years ago where it was just us and the guys, right? There was no individual work. There was no coaches working with the guys on the court. It was just us and the guys. So for the last 9 years, it's been a little bit different. I think the rule now is what, 4 and 4? Is that right?
Yes.
It used to be 8 and 0. So what we do, I don't do any conditioning in the summer. I don't know about you guys, but those days are over for me. If there's a couple guys maybe to reduce some body fat, we might do some biking, some low impact stuff, but those days are over. It's strictly just lifting in the summer. Same thing 4 days a week. They'll go home for probably 2 or 3 weeks after summer, which is August. They'll come back late August and what we call is our preseason, which lasts about 6 weeks. From there, that's when we'll start implementing conditioning. We'll condition twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday. Saturdays is a voluntary lifting, your Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And my purpose with the conditioning on Tuesdays and Thursdays is just to get them into practice shape, and that is it. You know, we use practice to get us in game shape. That'll go about 6 weeks. And then boom, we hit the season, we're running. So in season, I think is probably the most crucial time for us to keep them strong, to keep them healthy. And let's be honest, it's the longest, most grueling part of it. I mean, it's pretty simple to me. We work at this thing 350 days out of the year, right?
Yeah.
You know, so staying consistent with what you do, making guys coach each other, hold them accountable. It's all part of it. I mean, it's a year-round deal. When you say a year-round program, it's year-round. We work at it every day. It's just, it's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the in-season piece is becoming the most intriguing time, just because what you said, like it was 8-0, now it's 4-4. It feels like the traditional preseason is gone, where you used to be able to do that. I know in the last year and a half, Drake and I have completely changed our in-season training. You know, we lift every day that we practice. And I think that part's been big for us. It's smaller, condensed lifts. We're hitting our main stuff. And it's essentially an extended warm-up. I'm fortunate to work for Coach Underwood. He allows us to do that. He understands the value of it, but I think just the programming of the in-season has been huge for us, just with the consistency of training. We don't necessarily have our huge blocks anymore where it's we're going to get this done. It's honestly, it's the consistency, and our guys, just because we train, we get stronger, we jump higher, we run faster. That just is a byproduct of what we do. And more so than ever, I've got away from again, okay, we're in a hypertrophy phase, or we're in a power phase, or we're in a general strength or a basic strength phase. We've really kind of tried to build that stuff all together the best that we can. And again, we've used some technology to kind of get to that point, but I'd be curious to hear some other guys' thoughts. I'd love, go ahead, Scott, go ahead.
Question to you guys. Back when it was 8-0, you know, I pushed for at least get 2 hours of coaching on the court. I thought that was going to be a good idea. I'm not sure if that's a great idea anymore. My question to you is, do you guys feel it's a good idea? Would you rather go back to 8-0? Do you like it 4-4? Comments?
Go ahead, Alan.
When this thing switched up, I had my boss call me up to the third floor and you know, just kind of give me hey, the hours are switching up. We can go 4-4. What do you think about it? And I told him, I said, Coach, man, I think we're going to lose a valuable opportunity to cut some hay here in the summer by staying on the floor year round. And we got to think of what is the most important thing the most important attributes we need to saturate in development and XYZ. And I told him, I said, look, I want to stick with 6-2. I think we got to look at our long-term progression on this. And he looked at me and said, yep, I think you're right. Make sure we're on the same page. That's what I thought. He said, I'm going to give you right now, I'm going to give you 5 and I'm going to take 3. But if you need 6, let me know and I'll give you 6. And so part of that was on the floor. We're not conditioning on the floor. Our on court is skill development, because there is a huge skill component to basketball that I mean, our guys are developmental players. I don't have first round draft picks that are just freaks of nature. I mean, it's a developmental program. And so that skill development is still a large component of it. But I think if you can get everybody on the same page to kind of understand, and they might not understand the periodization model of it, but these old traditional Russian periodization models, they don't apply to our situation. These traditional models don't apply. I mean, we're all running some semblance of a concurrent periodization model. And if you can just get your boss man to understand, hey, we're going to have a single priority. And it doesn't mean we're not working on other things at a reduced clip, but we have a single priority, and that's our priority. And priority of June, July, August, September is general physical preparation. It's developing these athletic attributes. And then we shift it to maybe it is conditioning in October. Maybe that's your number one priority in October. Then you get to November, you know, and it shifts obviously to basketball. But you got to understand it's a sliding scale of how you're putting your planning together. And I think if you can get your boss man on board with that, but you got to do it by asking. Like, coach, you're telling me that we got to get more physical because of the league we play in. Well, I'm telling you, this is the way to do that. This is the plan to get what you want. It's kind of like John said earlier. You know, he has a new guy come in and he said, look, this is your team. What do you want? And I think a lot of times as strength coaches, we do the opposite of that. We go in there and say, hey, look, here's what we need to do. Here's the plan. I've got it mapped out. Rather than saying, hey, let me hear your concerns. Let me hear your thoughts. And then let me put the plan together from there. So I am in a good situation. I do got a head man that isn't going to go 4 and 4. He's going to go the opposite and give me more hours. I think taking a couple hours on the court and just working skill development is not a bad thing, but you just you can't run the wheels off in June and July. So you just got to be smart about it.
Trav, go ahead.
I'd add into that I think along the lines of trying to figure out what loads we can give them and can't give them and all that kind of stuff. There's a massive benefit when when players can get away from coaches for a little bit on a cognitive load. You know, there's a fatigue with being coached incessantly, you know, without either changing the voice a little bit to being your voice for a while where it's dominant, and then it's theirs during the season or whatever it happens to be. I think there used to be, back when we were 8-0, that there was this excitement that would build, this hunger to get back out on the court, this desire to be coached. And it seems like now it's like a treadmill almost at a steady state. And so I think that a lot of times we discount in the concept of a dynamical system that there's a cognitive aspect, a psychological aspect that really affects what we can tap into.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to follow up you real quick, Travis, on that and kind of take it a different way. But the motor development piece, whenever I first listened to Travis speak was at the Final Four in Phoenix, and one of the things that was really interesting to me was maybe, I don't want to say non-traditional, but some of the exercise selection that you used, and you talked about how the motor development and how you bridge between the weight room and the court. If you could speak to that just a little bit, I think it's really interesting and pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Just the idea that through the first 5 or 6 years of just kind of chasing strength as kind of what we were after, I think ultimately where I came was that I felt there could be, my job where I'm at, it's almost judged more how well they play basketball than how strong they are. And so a lot of times I'd be asked by coach or told by coach my success or failure was based on something like how well somebody guarded on the perimeter. And I'm like, that's so multidimensional. That's kind of I don't know that I can control that in the weight room. Right. So, but that's just the reality of where we are. And also I think there was a desire to see, I feel like there's more potential to maximize someone's development. Is there more to it than just being able to change the tissue to be able to lift more, and so on. So fast forward, where I'm at now is trying to really understand transfer to the sport, which is really challenging because it's moving more and more into an area of motor development and trying to understand, like we talked about earlier, intrinsic, self-organizing, trying to understand how do I really figure out how to, I start out with this wide list of things that I can't do very well. And then as I go through my first year, second year, third year, and then I get into this laser focus of what's going to allow me to be a draft pick or a professional player. a lot of the times those things come down to, it's not a strength issue. It's not a this, that. It's like a processing issue or a decision-making issue, or it's a confidence issue, or whatever it happens to be. And so I think I've slowly, admittedly, moved away from being more physical in what I'm measuring and care about to being more maybe psycho-emotional, or maybe even neurological.
Is there anyone that you've leaned towards or has helped mold that, mentor, someone from a motor development standpoint that you've kind of like pulled this from, or is that just you've created it in your, time of just seeing it happen over, over your time there?
There isn't just one. I think there's just a whole community of people, people who are great in the vision field, people who are great in the culture development field. There's a long list of people, but I would say just being able to kind of think laterally, being able to kind of pull from different disciplines and say, could this relate? And I think the biggest thing is that our sport is a chaos sport. And so there's aspects to track and field that will transfer. There are aspects to maybe even football that'll transfer. There are other, but in and of itself, it doesn't transfer as a whole, it transfers in part. So understanding a dynamical system, it's just a little bit more of a question than a statement that I think we're always asking. So I would say it's a journey. It's one that I don't know how far I'm into, but I know there's way more in front than there is behind. So.
Awesome. Dave, I want to go to you. I know you had something, then Scott, I'm going to follow up with you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the thing I'm worried about is, we started at 8-0 and then went to 6-2. I'm afraid we're going to end up having 2 hours and giving up 6 hours. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's basically going to look like probably in season year round. And that's something that I'm really, really worried about. Because we lose our time. The focus of the off season had a focus of off season. The focus of preseason was focused on, certain things. But, these coaches are going to want to get on the court for as much time as they can. And, we're going to lose our ability to keep our hands on our guys enough for development. And now it's going to become more damage control, I think, than anything.
I got a question for the group. What for the older guys especially? When did it switch over? It used to be 100% voluntary. There wasn't 8 hours. It was guys could train if they wanted to, but they had to volunteer. When did it become 8 hours? I can't remember what year. Anyone? No.
I want to say it was in like 2008 or 9.
Okay. Because I just remember as a player and early in my career, there was nothing basketball at all. And I mean, we would the only way we could have successful summer training came back to our culture and our buy-in. And I remember getting really upset if a dude would skip a Friday lift. And Fletch, what our Friday lifts are in the summer. Those are grinder days. And but it's just funny how this thing has evolved over time. And I remember as a player, it was the norm. Dudes went home. I went home and trained in my hometown. Most of my career, and it changed a lot through the early 2000s. But I agree. I think a lot of comments about going from 6-2 to 4-4. Dave, I'm with you. It's scary to think that we only get a few hours of mandatory time when this population, I said earlier and others have said it, all they do is play basketball. They play basketball all the time. So, and then my last thought is, and I've thought this for many, many years, I think it's overrated. You give these coaches 2 to 4 hours a week. The guys that really work, they're in there 2 or 3 hours a day. So in the grand scheme of things, what are we doing? And I don't think guys get a break from their coaching staff. It's just the year-round repetitive nature of it, which is tough. So I was a fan of the 6-2, made a lot of sense. I like that a lot better. The 4-4, obviously, we got to work with it. It is a rule, and coaches want to have their time with the guys. So I respect it, and we do the best we can with it. But But again, I would prefer more time. And I like what Alan said about, having that 5 and 3, just that extra hour. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
Scott, go ahead, and then Mike, I'm going to roll right to you.
Question for you guys. When was the last time Midnight Madness was a big deal? There used to be a lot of excitement. It used to be a big deal. Midnight Madness to me anymore, it's just another thing. It's just that there's no excitement to it. I think that's a problem.
That's awesome. I think Coach Knight spoke to that a little bit too, just the monotony of being coached all the time. It feels like it never ends, but that's so true. Mike?
No, I agree 100% on that Midnight Madness thing. But to John's point, I was going to say, I think with everybody, the 6 and 2 or the 5 and 3, it's definitely scary if that paradigm shifts to all basketball. But like the gym rats who are in there all the time, if these guys truly love their craft, if they're getting taught, those times shouldn't be mandatory. Those should be extra credit times. And so I kind of agree with the 8 and 0 of that they have to be with us. And then that extra credit time is just being taught on their craft, as Dr. Ramsey says, is their CEO. It's their CEO of their body. And so it's kind of strange with that, and it's a little scary.
Alan, can you touch a little bit on your in-season training? I'm intrigued by it. Obviously, you've got a great social media presence and have showed, kind of some details into that. But I think just your ability to maintain those guys' strength levels, I think, everyone in here does a good job, but you've obviously done a great job of showing it. And if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
I think when you're looking at it from an in-season approach, same thing, just a concurrent periodization model. That's what we're all in. And at that point in the year, priority 1 is basketball. That is sport specific. That's what we're doing. But I think when you start looking at things like, the repeated bout effect and knowing that you can maintain a movement pattern and exercise, but you can maintain that year round, and there's not going to be a soreness or something like that associated with it, because the effect of repeated bouts is that you get really, really sore, you get kind of sore, not really sore, and then you don't get sore from it anymore. And so for me, one thing is I really whittled down, and I have the big bang for the buck exercises, which is why you're always going to see squats, you're always going to see chins, overhead pressing, no matter where we're at in the year. We'll get a little zesty with some of our individualized stuff for different guys who have different needs, but we're not shelving things for the season. We're not trying to put things on the shelf and say, hey, we'll get it back in the off season. And I think a lot of people get intimidated by that. They might say, hey, you can't, whatever is important to you, whether that's a squat, whether that's whatever it might be, a deadlift, people might get intimidated by, well, we don't want to be sore, don't want them to be X, Y, Z. But the reality of it is the more you do it, the more exposures you have to it, the less there's going to be a negative effect associated with it. And it's when you start trying to pull it out because you're looking at your year saying, oh, well, we got a 4-week block of heavy volume games and X, Y, Z. So let's take it out and then we'll put it back in. That way they're not getting fried out by it. Well, all you've done is you just taken the traffic and moved it to the next stop. You didn't really solve any problems, because now you're going to compound that problem when you get to 4 weeks later and you try to reintroduce it. That's when you are going to deal with those soreness issues, lactic acid buildup, things like that, that the body just hasn't had that demand and it's kind of gotten away from. So there's not, it's all simple, nothing magical to it, but I think understanding that repeat bout effect it will go a long way in kind of comforting your own mind that you can do some pretty good stuff in season year round.
Yeah, it's I agree, right? It's the consistency of it. I think everyone here does a good job. I know Dave, over the years, what you've done with your guys in season and really throughout the year, just staying strong. Is there rep ranges? Is there percentages that you try to maintain? Is it the guys get to make their decision within a range? Is there anything there, Dave, that you do that kind of keeps them on that path?
Yeah, I still think you gotta hit some strength numbers. We keep our reps anywhere from 1 to 3. But like Alan said, it's the repeated bout. I mean, you got to keep those patterns going. You keep squatting, even if, your second day is light, but you still have to have, we try to squat at least twice a week, even in season. And I've got usually 3 different programs going within a team. I've got some guys that are sitting out. I've got low minute workout. I've got a high minute workout. And so it does change a little bit. It's usually a little bit more opportunities for the low minute guys, but you still have to touch on your strength numbers at least every 2 to 3 weeks, I think, to maintain what you're doing and even to build as you move along.
Yeah, it's I think one thing that's changed, we talk about the 8-0 and the time that we're given. I think the other thing that's changed is and we're going to take this a little bit of different direction, is TV rights. Like if you think about the nights we're playing games and the time that we're getting back from games, and you're on the road and you're not just playing a Tuesday and a whatever Friday, there's Super Tuesday, Monday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So you're playing every day of the week. Is there anything that you do on those heavy travel weeks where you're trying to manage it? You change something? Anyone can kind of take this one because we're all in that. John, go ahead, Brady.
Well, with the times changing a little bit, technology's changed as well. And Alan's in the same conference I am. We're in the American Conference. And I think we're probably, if we're not, I think we're the most traveled conference there is. It doesn't really make any sense. If you look at it, it's Tulane, it's Wichita State, it's Houston, it's SMU, Temple's in Philadelphia, UConn just left. We got Florida schools. We're all over the place. And you're talking about TV rights. We're playing 9 o'clock games at Wichita State, and then we're coming back and we're supposed to play 2 days later, and we talk about, during the season, I think the whole periodizations kind of went out the window in a lot of ways. There's no really maintain. I don't really ever understood that. Whenever I was looking at a book, you talk about, you have your training phase, you got about, say you get 8 weeks to train a guy, and then you're supposed to take the next 16 weeks of a season and you're supposed to maintain the strength that you built in that 8 weeks. That just doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, we're still training throughout the year. And the use of technology, if you have the means to it, we use Elite Form and we use, force plates as well. And what Elite Form's been able to do is take percentages out the window, and we can get a training effect by just measuring speed of the bar. So we can actually train with that intent of what that is. Because if a guy comes in, we get home at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're coming back for a 6 p.m. lift the next day. Chances are their actual 80% is not a real 80% that day. So we're going to move the bar and we'll be able to get instant feedback to be able to get that. And I think that it's important that we have self-regulating systems, and, coaching eyes is another good piece of that. And, there's a lot of other people on this panel can probably take it different directions with Coach Knight. It sounds like he has more of like a long-term athletic development approach. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what kind of things he uses for that.
The one thing we haven't mentioned is, we're all kind of talking about our guys that are rotation guys, starters, and there's got to be consistency, and like Dave was saying, you got to touch some strength numbers, and I completely agree with that. But what about those second tier guys that are not quite maybe at the bottom of the rotation? Maybe your 8th, 9th, 10th guy. What about your developmental guys that just aren't ready to play? Those guys are training like it's summer with us. There's a balance with all that stuff. So we'll utilize any moment we can. If it's the day before a game, if it's right before the game with that group, just to give them a training stimulus. And so those guys need volume. Now, it can't be the type of volume where they can't walk for 2 days. So there's got to be consistency, and they've got to have a model that makes sense for them. But we've been a developmental program for years. Guys show up, they got to get better. We've certainly had some pretty talented freshmen, but guys got to get better. And we've had a ton of guys that have had breakout seasons as juniors and seniors. But that's a huge part. So I'm just curious, who else has a model that, what are you doing with your guys that aren't quite ready to play maybe their first or second year?
Go ahead, Alan. Casey, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think you gotta break down and understand why those second tier guys aren't playing. I think it's important before you just say, hey, they're not getting as many minutes, get them in a weight room and move more barbells. And so for us, the situation we're in, if we've got a red shirt or if we got a transfer, if we got somebody sitting out, they train 4 days a week and they train hard. I don't care if they're sore, don't care, if they're fresh, we don't need them fresh. So we are going to try to cut some hay in season. We're going to train them hard throughout the entire season. For us, we play very deep into our bench. I mean, we'll play 9-10 guys every game. And so that 9th and 10th guy, the guy who's not getting the same minutes, usually it's not that he isn't getting minutes because his squat isn't very good or his chin ups are subpar. And I think that's when you got to start understanding, okay, this guy's number one priority might be he has 0 basketball IQ. So when you've got free time, and I think we've all touched on that, hey, the amount of time in front of coaches, the amount of time is spent of all of us. I mean, they're getting stuff put on their plate year round. If he's got an extra hour during the day, is he not playing because his chin-ups suck, or is he not playing because he has 0 basketball IQ? So the problem to that might be go watch film with your position coach, right? And so I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer to how you want to break down training sessions, but I think that you got to try to put your guys into the best position to try to, contribute to the team, get more minutes, do their deal. And so I think whatever you end up trying to do, just make sure you're doing it from a standpoint of understanding maybe exactly what they need is more weight room, but maybe it's not. And don't be so married to the weight room that you might be taken away from something else just so that we can have a little bit more to do when we're quote unquote bored in season because we're only training guys for, 2 hours a week or whatever it might be.
Casey, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with Alan completely. We kind of at some point as our rotation kind of goes from 10 to 8 or 7, and it starts to shrink at any point in the non-conference or as you get into conference. What we've done is basically those guys after they've played the game, we're going to get them up the next day. And a lot of times you got to take into account they're not very happy to do that. They're pissed they're not playing. They're pissed that they have to get up early and train. But I think the biggest thing we do as a staff is not just myself, but whether it's GAs, whether it's their position coach, that assistant, or our head coach himself, we show them a lot of love. We'll get them up. Yeah, they're going to do some training. They're going to do some conditioning. But like Alan said, it's usually not anything in our area that's limiting why they're not on the court. It's basketball. So I think we kind of, try and really put it back on the kid to understand what he has to get better at. And sometimes you get, pretty tremendous buy-in, and other times, it's unfortunate, but playing time isn't for everyone. And guys kind of suffer from that. But I think the big thing is conditioning becomes so much more important at that point, because especially if you're in your conference play, you're probably not practicing with great intensity. So those guys could really fall by the wayside and get detrained very, very quickly. And then when an opportunity does come, they're not ready. So there's a piece to that I think involves us, but I think you also have to include your staff. And the biggest thing is give the guys confidence and give the guys kind of build them up to know, hey, like no matter what is going on, control what you can control and be ready when your moment comes.
I think that's good. I want to kind of go back to Coach Knight here, because the last two guys talked about, is it the film? Is it because you're not good at squats and chins? Is it because you're not good at the weight room? It goes kind of back to what you were talking about earlier. And how do you, Coach, evaluate that? Is it because they're not good at this? How do you, what are the tools that you use maybe to kind of identify that, to help them understand what exactly it is that maybe they do need to improve from a mental standpoint or from a focus standpoint, and how are those conversations driven?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I do is ask Coach Grant, what's limiting him, getting into the rotation. Sometimes it can be pretty obvious, and sometimes you can have an opinion. You know, you're there at practice every day, you're watching the games. Sometimes it's things you don't even know. So I think the biggest thing is you have to have a level of communication. Otherwise, the kid's there, he's pissed off, and everyone else around the staff is just going to guess at what it is, or they're going to write the kid off. So I think, you know, just having those honest conversations, you know, you can sit back and you can look at what can I do to help him. But oftentimes, you know, I haven't in my career really seen a squat or a chin up be the reason why a kid can't get on the court. It's more so, can they play or can they not? So.
What about the stresses of travel? We talked about the late nights, the early mornings. Is there anything that you guys are doing after games, recovery standpoint? Is there, if you had to pick a recovery modality or a piece of technology that helps you understand a guy needs recovery? I think there's two different ways to take this, but something that's outstanding in your program that you would just put, hey, I'm putting all my money on that, and I know for a fact that it's telling me exactly what I want. I'll go ahead and start it. And Mike, I'll come to you. We use, again, we use the force plate system. And if you've played us, you've seen it out on the court. We jump every day that we have practice, that we lift. We use the Hawkins system. This isn't a plug to them, but it's everyday data. It doesn't necessarily change what's happening that day, but we look at trends. You know, and there's been times where we played, you know, 2 times this year. We had 14 straight days essentially, with the front end and the back end of an off day, and just a lot of travel and games and practice in between. And, you know, like all of us, like, you know, coaches go hard, and they're going to consistently go hard. And how do you have those conversations? You know, it's not the easiest conversation, but I think always having your athletes' best interests in mind and going in there and having that tough conversation. You know, if we're looking at neuromuscular fatigue and we're seeing that in our system, you know, I'm going up there and I'm at least having the conversation, you know, and to be honest, there's times where, you know, it's like, hit the door. Okay, no problem. But if at that point it's in your mind and I've at least expressed it, then I know that the way that we work, it'll come back. So for us, you know, that system's really good. It's, I know some of you guys use Catapult and different systems to kind of track player load. But is there anything, you know, outside of that you guys are using that you're just saying, yeah, this is what we do? Mike?
Yeah, so we use Connects on here. We have force plates as well. But one of the biggest pieces that we've used is just questionnaires. Get the feedback from them. You know, getting that feedback from them and the coach and seeing where that stuff is. Does it meet in the middle? And then letting the coach see what it really is. And then we have a system in place. If guys do a questionnaire post game and it's at a certain number, then we're going to do a certain protocol post game that's optional for them. But most of them want to take part in it because they feel better afterwards. And then really getting ahead of soft tissue modalities and getting them in a recovery mindset and state, so the next day they're ready to go. And that's really been beneficial for us. It's the feedback. It's not super scientific, but there's something about giving them that ownership in it, letting the coaches see so you can actually plan practice adequately the next day. Especially when you talk about playing, like for us leaving to California and heading out to Utah and Colorado, that's a pretty brutal trip coming from the West Coast back on that side. So those pieces have been really useful for me.
Yeah, I know a couple of years ago we were playing, John, we were playing you, and you were talking about, it may have been Derek Walton and his player load against the team and some of the changes that you guys made. And if you could just speak to that a little bit, I know that was a big part of that year for you all.
Yeah, absolutely. So we implemented the Catapult system. I think we just finished 4 years with this. So we got a lot of data. And I'm trying to think, Derek Walton would have been a senior in the 16-17 season. We had a slow start, but, you know, ended up making a nice little run, made it to a Sweet 16. But what we found with the data in practice, you know, early on was, you know, he's playing 38 minutes a game because he's got to be out there, you know, and then his player loads and what he was achieving during practice, his backup and the other point guards we're getting the same reps as him. And so it was an easy discussion, and Coach Beeline is so data driven and wants science, and very cerebral with all these things. So it was an easy thing that myself and our athletic trainer were like, look at, we're burning it on both ends here, you know. And we can, you know, we should be able to see it without having data and catapult or any force plates. But, you know, I've always been amazed at, if we have a 2-hour practice, how different it could be for that starter versus the backup, or vice versa, based on the dynamics, or maybe the bigs, maybe their position coach was way harder on them than the guards that day, or vice, whatever, you know. I found it very useful, just to connect some dots with our coaching staff, and we were able to get to a point where we track it real time in practice. We would set, these are the parameters we want on a 2-day prep versus 1 day before a game. You know, we can't control game day. He's going to play as much as he needs to play to win the game, right? But we would make adjustments to, like, at the halfway point of practice, we still do it to this day. If someone's player loads are just tracking way too high, one of our main guys that we want to kind of manage, we'll find ways to maybe get them out of a few drills here and there. Maybe their backup can get a few extra reps. There's all kinds of ways to kind of manipulate practice, that everyone's doing the same similar stuff, and to get that stress on their body down. So that's been helpful for us, you know, just having that system and managing guys. So.
Anyone that, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we use Catapult, and we had the Force Decks this year. And one of the things that was kind of interesting to me is looking at player load is each player kind of has a different ceiling, you know, and one particular load for one guy is not anything like it is for another guy. And trying to marry the data for the Force Decks, we would jump those guys the day after one game during the week, and then the day after an off day, just to kind of see what the numbers were. You know, we weren't really looking for any data yet, as more just collecting for the first year or two. But it was always amazing to me to see the capacity of somebody. One particular guy was different than another guy. And how do you guys deal with that as a you know, within a team setting, one guy that obviously has a higher capacity for training than another?
I mean, Dave, I'll comment on that. That's a really good point. I mean, if you think about, you know, we had a 7'1.5" inch center this year. We had a 5'11" point guard, right? So think about, with just simple dynamics of stride length and all that, that 7'1" dude doesn't have to put the same effort. We all know that to move. And so, you know, what we've done to kind of counter the differences in player loads and capacity that we'll see is, one, we want to compare them to themselves. So we get data, just like Fletch uses the force plate. You got data points every day, or, you know, at least 4 or 5 days a week. We're going to compare them to themselves. So we know that if this guy, if 1,000 is the highest we've ever seen versus our point guards or wings may get to 1,200 on a game, we know that's their capacity. The other thing we'll do is, when we evaluate them after practice and games, we'll compare them to not bigs and guards, but more like, here's our bigs, here's our wings that are 6'4" to 6'7", and here's our, you know, like our 1s and 2s that are 5'11" to 6'3", if you will. And so that's been good for us, because coaches are like, why isn't this guy, you know, achieving this player load? He's not playing hard. Well, no, it's different. He went through a different experience based on his length and his body type. So that's a great point. So I just wanted to share how we've, you know, navigated the data and to make it real, because our coaches have to have commentary when you give them data. You can't just give them data. They gotta, you know, it's gotta be broken down.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, you know, when you talk about that, the data piece per athlete, I think the other thing that is important is the consistency of that data. Dave, I heard a piece of it and you talked about it. We first got the force plates, and I think a lot of times people get data and they're like instantly trying to drive decision making. And it's like, okay, we've got the force plates. you have a left-right imbalance of 10%. We better shut it down. Like, well, what is that? I mean, he's probably jumped that way his entire life. You know, people want to have a perfect picture of what it's supposed to look like. I think we could probably all touch on it's not perfect. And it never really does look perfect, but it's the consistency of that data. I know we got our plates really, you know, we've had them now for 3 years. So we've got like 12,000 points of data. And it took me a year and a half before I even started having an idea of what I was looking at. And it was like, because every day was just a little bit different, and you're like, don't get too excited about one data point and moving on. If you guys could to talk about the consistency of your testing and how you utilize that to drive your decision making, or is there what is that breaking point moment where you're like, I definitely have to go say something, or do you have that? I'll go ahead and follow up on it. It's for our system, right? We're looking at a left-right difference, okay, in our jump height average. We look at really 3 things: ground contact time, how long does it take you to get off the plates, and what does that look like? What does the propulsive phase look like? Is it slow? Is it you know, does it take longer, or is there fatigue there? Because a lot of times you can achieve the same jump height with a different mechanic. Okay, so we're looking at what does that fatigue level look like? Even though your jump height is still the same, it took you a lot longer to get off the ground than what you normally do. All right, so that's one thing that we look at. Then the other thing that we look at is a left-right difference on the eccentric braking. We want to see what's going on there, because on the eccentric, if you watch a guy squat or jump or whatever the case may be, you'll see a shift if something's bothering them. So what I found out is on that eccentric brake, right, on the drop, when they handle the bottom position before they go into the propulsive phase, we're looking at a left-right difference there. And we're looking at a running average. So let's say your running average is 6%. We're looking at 10% outside of that running average where we start to throw up our red flag. So if Allen's jump is consistently 6% and now all of a sudden it's 18%, okay, he's 12% over his average. Something's going on here that is leading to a shift outside of his normal, and we need to now have this conversation. For us, that's been awesome. We've uncovered a lot in our guys with those discussions and comparing it with our jump height and fatigue data. So for us, in terms of technology, you know, the Hawken plate has been great in that, but that's kind of specifically how we've used it throughout the season. We've caught issues. We've been able to get soft tissue issues taken care of before they become major issues. You know, I think there's been a lot that we've been able to uncover with that system over specifically really the last year and a half. Brady, go ahead.
Really just a question back at you. And maybe this would be good for Coach Dave and a lot of viewers back home, but you know, you said it took you about a year and a half to figure out what you were actually looking at. How long do you think, how many data points do you have to collect before you think it's actually utilizable? You're talking about a running average. How much data do you actually need to really have a reliable running average?
Yeah, we've tossed this back and forth, and I'm gonna speak to what's worked for me. Maybe not necessarily what the industry standard is. I think a lot of times research is driven off a short sample size with what you're looking at. For me, I like to have about 3 months of uninterrupted data, where it's this guy hasn't had anything catastrophic that has led to a difference in his jump, and it's just been consistent fatigue data. In terms of, you know, then we can start looking at averages, but I can't stand looking at 4 days of jumps and saying, you know, a month from now we jump again. It was like, okay, you have an issue, because that jump may have just been a really good jump, you know, the first testing day, or it may have just been a really bad jump. You don't know until you have that consistency. For us, we like to look at about 3 months of uninterrupted data.
Thanks.
Ramsey, go ahead.
Yeah, I think another way to look at that too is just looking at coefficient of variance of data. And that might be a way to start seeing, you know, at least starting to figure out, is what I'm looking at an outlier from a data perspective, or is this a real meaningful change in what my guys are giving me? And that's what we need as coaches, right? If it's real, then we make those actions and that decision making in our programming. But if it's like you just said, if a guy was more motivated that morning to jump or whatever reason, you know, some of the issues just lie in the data. But another thing that came to mind is, as I'm thinking of, you know, the almost 700 people watching, if you're in a position where you don't have access, you know, we're all fortunate to work in big programs where we have access to some really fun technology. But I think Coach Chapman talked about questionnaires earlier. There's so much you can get just from talking with your guys, whether you objectify it with a formal questionnaire or you just create some type of culture where they communicate. And that was, you know, I came from an area or an organization where we had a lot of money and a lot of technology. And yes, I went to a college program that was relatively similar, but when I first got there, I just asked our guys, I said, hey, do you guys want to fill out questionnaires every day? And 9 days out of 10, you're going to give me the same answer. And then on that 10th day, you give me an outlier and that's the one I'm looking for. Or you guys just want to communicate with me every single day, be super transparent. Let's talk all the time about how you're feeling. And then we can make decisions based off that. So I think there's some fun ways to go about it, which is what we're covering with the technology side. I think there's also some very practical ways. So if you're, you know, watching this and you don't have access to money, don't think that you can't find ways to monitor some of this stuff. But I would also say become very familiar with all this stuff, because if you do reach a program, you know, similar to the ones that the panelists are at, you're going to have to know the ins and outs of some of these things for sure. So don't ignore them, but just because you don't have access to them doesn't mean you can't get a lot of value from something as simple as a questionnaire asking your guy how you feel.
I was just going to add to that, Ramsey, great point. Long before we had technology, the question we asked every day was, how do you feel, right? And to your point, coaches at the lower level collegiate ranks or the high school level that are listening, there's so much value in having great relationships and getting honest feedback from your athletes on how do you feel. And you adjust based on that simple question.
Go ahead, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think when you look at the reality of most coaching situations, most schools do not have access to the resources to have $10,000 force plates and, you know, $10,000, you know, accelerometer and different, you know, different cool tools. And so I think the communication side of it, again, what John just said, hey, how you feeling? And then immediately stepping onto a scale right after that, so you can at least do some different things with body weight, understanding what hydration might be at without actually having to test it. But the other thing too is I just want to throw this out there. You know, we do use some technology at the University of Houston, but if you're asking me my priorities, the budget I have might not be the same as Kansas or Michigan. Well, when I walked into University of Houston, my priority was not how do we get more force plates and Connexon and XYZ. My priority was how can I get more money to feed my guys at an extremely high level? And then how can we set up our schedule so that during the actual in season, we can sleep instead of having to come in super early or have, you know, maybe lackluster training sessions because we're working around so many different scheduling things. So I think it's important to put out there that as other coaches are climbing up the ladder, I mean, your priority is your priority and you can do what you do, but there's definitely more than one way to skin a cat. And I think that technology is great because it gives us information that we can base actions off of, but eventually you got to take an action. And the action is not always, hey, just pull them completely out. The action is, well, how do we make decisions along the way to make sure that we're not having to just pull guys out? So I think it's always important to kind of throw that out there and just, you know, it can be a little intimidating and it can be a little confusing for people who've never, you know, lived in that world of just data analytics from collecting information.
Coach Hill, I know you had something.
No, I was just going to say, we do the, you know, the paradigm of having more technology, but then having less technology. I found for us, the best form of communication we've gotten is our board, where the guys come in, they write down their weights every single day. We ask them Hoya scale, how you feel, 1 to 5. Then we ask breakfast, lunch, dinner, plus if you did, minus if you didn't, 0 if it didn't happen. But then the last one is sleep. How many hours sleep do you get? And so it just honestly gets them thinking about each one of those things. They have to make sure that they're keeping their weight. And it goes back to Alan's point earlier about teaching, teaching them to do that, teaching them for lifestyle. And I've just found asking those 4 questions leads to more data points than you can get from, I guess, a lot of technology points.
Awesome. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody tweeted this a couple months ago, and I actually screenshotted it. It was a player said, "Hey, I want to be a pro," and the strength coach said, "You didn't even eat breakfast today." And just to Alan's point, that's so important that and one of the things that I did too was try to get with our academic advisor and schedule classes in season where these guys got no early classes and they were able to sleep. So that's a great point, Alan.
Yeah. Is there time's starting to run up on us here, and I want to thank everyone again. Is there anyone else that's got a final shot that they want to put out, something that's on their strength and conditioning heart that they just have to get off? Feel good about it? Yeah. Okay, guys. Awesome. I think we got a lot of information covered here today. Hopefully everyone that's listened, enjoyed where it went. Everyone had awesome input and certainly different ideas. And I think that's really valuable. You don't get stuck on one way. Understand there's a lot of different ways to do it. All of these guys have had unprecedented, unbelievable success in what they do. And each one of them has got there differently and very confident in how they've gotten there and continue to be that way. So again, just can't stress that enough. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Appreciate everyone. Again, reminder, these guys did this, for free. They're not charging us anything to get up here and spend 2.5 hours with us this morning and give their insight. We just ask that if you could go to the website, go to the FundMe and donate. Again, we'd appreciate it. Awesome cause. It's can't thank everyone enough for joining in and sharing all of their thoughts.
Adam, I'd like to say, look, I'm really excited about where our field is right now. I'm an old strength coach. Me and Scott are really old. But to see the young guys and the knowledge that's in this panel, I think we're in a really good place with our strength coaches.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dave. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Drake, you got anything? Go ahead, Ramsey.
I was just saying bye to everyone. I appreciate everybody, and it's been great to sit here and chat with a lot of you guys. We live in the same worlds, but rarely do we get a chance to talk shop. So this was awesome. So I'm glad to be a part of it.
Go ahead, Alan.
I want to say one thing, and it's something that I feel very, very strongly about. I'm a huge believer that success will leave clues. And as you're, looking around the world and you're trying to identify what it is you need to do to be successful, look to those who have had success doing what you're trying to do. But also, at the end of the day, just be the best in the world at what you do, because that's how you're going to have success, whether it comes down to the networking question from earlier, whether it comes down to getting buy-in, whether it comes down to any of this. Just be the best in the world at what you do. And that's going to take you really, really far in this thing.
Absolutely. No question. Drake, you good?
Yep. If nobody else has anything to say, I just wanted to say thank you guys again for coming on and doing this. It definitely wouldn't have been this big, or we wouldn't have raised this much money if you guys didn't donate your time for this cause. So really appreciate that. So we'll end this meeting here, but the link for this afternoon will be a new link. I think if you guys signed up for that, if not, we'll send it out on YouTube as well for those viewing.
Absolutely. Thanks again, guys. We appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great Easter weekend.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.